All right. How's everybody doing today? We are starting a new unit today. We are moving out of ecology and we are moving into basically what is life. We're going to take a look at what the characteristics of life are here in our first chapter in this unit, ladies and gents. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, living things that have all of the characteristics of life are called organisms. If you have something that has just one, two, three, four of the characteristics of life, but not all of the characteristics of life, it can't be called an organism, which means it is not a living thing. Has to have all of the characteristics. So there are some strange things out there. Let's say viruses. Viruses are one of those things that scientists kind of debate a little bit about. Generally speaking, it's thought that viruses are not considered to be living things because they really don't quite fit all of the characteristics, and yet they come awfully close. So there are some things out there that sometimes make it a little bit confusing, and things that can act an awful lot like a living thing and perhaps not actually be one. So we're going to say that there are 6 characteristics of life. Depending on what book or resource you use, they might have a slightly different number. They might have 7, they might have 5, they might even have it as low as 4, but that's only because of the way they either combine or split up the characteristics, because some of these things can kind of be combined together. Some of them can be divided up. In CK12, they say that there are 5 because they do a little bit of combining of a couple of them. The textbook that I used to use said 6. I tend to say 6. I have seen sources that say 7. But generally speaking, there's right around there. They all, again, contain the same information in these lists. It's just combined in different ways. But we're going to stick with 6 for right now, and we're going to say that the first one is that all living things are made of cells. And so cells are basically these structures that have a specific job to do or specific function. Different cells can have different jobs and functions. All cells do have some things in common, but all living things are made of cells. And so that means it can either be made of just one cell. There are organisms that are made of just one cell. They are generally microscopic in size, extremely tiny. Or like ourselves, they can be made of many cells. So humans are made of many cells. Animals are made of many cells. Plants are made of many cells. And an important point here, we're going to dive into cells a little bit more in a few weeks, but just to kind of give you a little preview, cells really are the smallest unit of life. So you can't have something that is alive that is made of something that is less than a cell or just parts of a cell. It has to be at least one full cell. Living things that are made of just the one cell, these are referred to as unicellular organisms. Uni, of course, refers to the number 1. Cellular refers to the idea of being made of cells. And that means that organisms that are made of more than one cell are called multicellular organisms. The second characteristic of living things is that living things grow and they develop. And so that growth could be by increasing in the size of the cell. So this happens particularly with unicellular organisms. The size of their cell may increase. Or as in the case of multicellular organisms such as humans, the number of cells actually increases. Okay, you can see a little diagram down there of a growing plant. In that case, the plant is developing or creating more and more cells. And again, we're going to talk about cell reproduction later on and how it is that more and more cells get made. That will come in a few weeks, but just know that growth can happen in two ways. If it's a unicellular, it means the cells themselves get larger. If it's a multicellular organism, it generally means that there are more and more cells being made. Development, on the other hand, does not have to do with growth. It has to do with changes over a lifetime. So for instance, a tadpole changing into a frog. It goes through different stages of development. You could even talk about a human being going through different stages of development, going from like infancy to toddlerhood to early childhood to middle childhood to adolescence to early adulthood to middle adulthood to old adulthood. We go through all of these different stages of development, and our bodies change in different ways as we go from stage to stage. So growth is getting bigger, development is change over a lifetime. All right, so our third characteristic, remember that the first characteristic that we talked about was that all organisms are made of cells. The second one is that all organisms go through growth and development. The third one is that all organisms reproduce. They make more of their kind. So reproduction is basically the process by which an organism makes one or more new organisms of its own kind. So there are a couple of different ways that organisms can reproduce. They can either just divide. All right, bacteria and unicellular organisms do this. Even a few multicellular organisms can just divide. Take, for instance, a starfish, right? A starfish can reproduce by, if one of its legs is cut off and thrown back into the sea, that will grow a new starfish, right? So it can divide to grow a new organism. But on the other hand, a lot of organisms reproduce through mating. So most animals tend to reproduce this way. Same with humans. The number of offspring, however, for different organisms can be very different. So, cows, when they reproduce, they typically have one or maybe two baby cows at a time. Over the course of their life, they have a lot more than that, but at one time, they're going to have one, maybe two. Again, humans generally have one, maybe more, but typically one at a time. Frogs, on the other hand, could have 100 babies at one time. And a lot of this has to do with what is their likelihood of survival. So the less their chance of survival, the more babies they tend to produce. So God has given them that ability to give them a greater chance at survival. All right, so our fourth characteristic is that all living things respond to stimuli. In other words, they respond to things that are happening in the environment around them. And those changes in the environment are called stimuli. All right, so when you walk outside and it's particularly frigid out there, okay, the change is a change in temperature, the cold air. So that cold air is called a stimulus, or called stimuli, just so you know, is plural. Stimulus is one. So in this case, cold air would be a stimulus. So there are a couple of different kinds of stimulus. You can have internal stimuli, things like hunger would be one, thirst would be another. And these stimuli cause you to respond in some way. When you are hungry, typically your response is a buildup of saliva and a hunt for food. For thirst, your response tends to be to go look for something to drink. So you can also, though, have external stimuli, and that would be more like what I was talking about a moment ago with the cold air. When there's cold air, that cold air is outside of your body, and so it is external, on the exterior of your body, and it causes a response, however, still in your body. So you begin to shiver to try and generate heat in order to keep yourself warm. And as humans, we can also make the decision to go get a jacket, a hat, gloves, scarf. Plants respond to the external stimulus of the sun and sunlight. And sun and sunlight causes them to grow and to go through the process of photosynthesis. It's kind of interesting because probably most of you know that plants grow towards sunlight, generally speaking. And that is one of the responses that plants have to the stimuli of sunlight. The fifth characteristic of all living things are trying to maintain a status of what we call homeostasis. And basically, homeostasis is an attempt to maintain steady internal conditions, even when things around the organism, the external conditions, are changing. So, for instance, we sweat if we get hot. Okay, that is our body's attempt to maintain homeostasis, to stay at a steady body temperature. Instead of allowing our body temperature to continue to rise with the temperature that is around us on a really hot day, our body will sweat to try and cool itself down to stay at a normal temperature. Or, like I mentioned a minute ago, shivering. So you can see there's actually a really close relationship here with homeostasis and the idea of responding to stimuli. And this is where we sometimes see some textbooks or resources will kind of combine these together. I happen to have them separated. Either way is perfectly fine. But for the purposes of our notes here, we're going to say that homeostasis is a little different. So homeostasis is part of our response to the stimuli. So, or the reason why we respond to the stimuli, I guess, would be an even better way of saying it. We want to maintain this normal level of things. Everything in nature that God has created really wants to maintain this homeostasis, wants to maintain normalcy, so to speak. And so we do respond to stimuli in order to do that. So homeostasis really is the reason that we respond to stimuli, the reason why our bodies do the things that they do, or different organisms do the things that they do. The sixth and final characteristic of all living things is that they use energy, have to have energy in order to stay alive. And so all living things use energy. Cells continuously use energy to transport substances from one place to another within its body or within the organism. It uses energy to make new cells. It uses energy to perform chemical reactions. There are tons of chemical reactions happening within your body all the time as your body is digesting and making new cells and combining proteins and amino acids and all sorts of things that are going on in your body. The energy ultimately comes from the sun, because we get it. Our energy, of course, comes from the food that we eat, But the food that we eat got its energy from the sun at some point down the line, as we talked about when we talked about food webs and energy pyramids. So ultimately, all energy comes from the sun. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you have a great day.